People's ideas are unreliable things. And I'd be surprised if we're right even half the time. Those are the words of Taiichi Ohno, who's regarded as the founder of the Lean movement. Ohno was talking to his production managers at Toyota about situations that crop up on the factory floor. The warning here is that when we arrive at conclusions about things that we haven't actually seen, our odds of getting it right tend to be less than 50-50, perhaps a lot less. To counter this, Ohno instructed his managers to go out into the workforce as often as possible and to see situations with their own eyes. The words he used to describe that are genshi genbutsu. That's Japanese for go to the source of the problem and find out for yourself, or go and see for short. Now, genshi genbutsu might sound like a sort of a slogan, maybe something you put in a poster or a plaque on the wall. But Ohno meant it to mean much more than that. For Ohno, it was a basic part of a whole management system that he was trying to implement. And it becomes clear that genshi genbutsu is actually a radical idea that flies in the face of conventional business practice. I'd like to illustrate by telling you about an incident that took place in Everett, Washington. This is about a worker named Bob. Bob was an assembler at Electronetics, which is the electrical products division of an organization called the Northwest Center. Bob had what are called developmental disabilities, and Northwest Center was actually set up to provide employment for people like Bob. The way they did that was they ran two kinds of businesses. Businesses that operated at a profit, and then businesses that ran at a loss in order to accommodate workers like Bob. Bob's job there was to assemble brushes for electric motors. Brush is the electrical contact point. When Bob had been on the job for a few days, a problem came up. It was noticed that Bob was making defective brushes. His supervisor was aware of his condition, and to counter this, he did what he normally did in these situations. He assigned an inspector to check all the brushes that Bob was making. Now, this seemed like a pretty normal solution to everybody there, but it didn't to Mike Quinn, who was the new vice president of manufacturing. Mike, to be clear, was not a social worker. He did not know much about Bob's condition. Mike was a veteran production manager with 30 years' experience in the steel industry, and also a lean expert. Mike had been hired as part of a bold mission to see if Northwest Center's divisions, all of its divisions, could be run profitably regardless of the capabilities of the workers. Mike was convinced it could be done, and his secret weapon was genshi genbutsu. Now, when Mike heard about the situation with the defective brushes and how that had been handled, he did exactly what he would have done in any organization. He asked the supervisor to go and observe Bob and see if he could find out why Bob was making defective brushes. So the supervisor went and observed and came back the next day with some interesting observations. First of all, Bob was making about 6 defective brushes a day, consistently. And they all had the same problem. The screws holding them together weren't tightened. So the question was why? And Mike asked the supervisor to go back, spend some more time, and see if he could find out. So the supervisor went back, and after a while, something happened. The battery on Bob's drill ran out. Bob then put down the brush he was working on in the bin and stood there waiting for a job coach to come and replace the batteries on his drill. When Mike heard this, he asked an innocent question. Why couldn't Bob, who got dressed every morning and took a bus into work, change the batteries on his own drill? It turned out that despite the conventional wisdom about his condition, he learned this in a matter of minutes. And when Bob went to work, his defects dropped to 0, And after a few days, his output got to be so high that they had to add a second assembly station behind him to process all the brushes he was completing. Now, this is quite a turnaround, but this wasn't rocket science. There were no theories or methods applied here. All we did is observe. And through the magic of Genchi Genbutsu, we found out that, contrary to our expectations, the problem with the brushes wasn't Bob. The problem was the process. And by fixing the process, we have gotten rid of an inspector, we've allowed Bob to double his productivity, and frankly, we've stopped patronizing Bob. And speaking of patronizing, do you know what they called workers like Bob? They called them clients. Bob's not a client. Bob's a worker who pulls his weight, and the numbers prove it. Now, I think everybody here probably agrees that the kind of thinking that originally was applied there is pretty typical of workplaces. And I think we're not offering any revelations here when we say that decisions based on incomplete information and preset ideas are pretty widespread. What's valuable about this story is it shows us the possibilities. Imagine how the world would change if every organization embraced the spirit of Genchi Genbutsu and practiced it every day. Imagine what the impact of that would be.